Good evening and welcome to this Ingraham Angle special, Trump versus the Intel Resistance. I'm David Webb for Laura tonight, who is on vacation. And boy, do we have a show for you. Security clearances stripped, media bias exposed, and a potential major setback for special counsel Robert Mueller. We'll have it covered throughout the hour. Earlier this week, the White House made big news when it announced that President Trump had stripped John Brennan of his security clearance. In case you're not familiar with Mr. Brennan's work, he's the guy that went from Obama's CIA director to a far-left cable news pundit and from almost the moment President Trump took office. Here's what he said tonight.
What really gets under my skin is Mr. Trump's lack of decency, integrity, honesty, and his lack of commitment to this country's well-being and national security. And Mr. Trump, time after time, I think, has really just disappointed millions of Americans, which I'm trying to give voice to. And so I know a lot of people think that a former intelligence official shouldn't be doing this. I don't consider what I'm doing political at all.
Now, 15 top former intelligence officials from both political parties, you see them on screen, have come to Brennan's defense, releasing a statement that said in part, and I quote, "We all agree that the president's action regarding John Brennan and the threats of similar action against other former officials have nothing to do with who should and should not hold security clearances and everything to do with an attempt to stifle free speech." It goes on to say decisions on security clearances should be based on national security concerns and not political views. Later today, 60 former CIA officers also released a letter criticizing Trump's action against Brennan, but President Trump is sticking by his guns.
I've gotten tremendous response from having done that because security clearances are very important to me. Very, very important. And I've had a tremendous response for having done that. There's no silence. If anything, I'm giving him a bigger voice. Many people don't even know who he is, and now he has a bigger voice, and that's okay with me because I like taking on voices like that. I've never respected him. I've never had a lot of respect.
And Brennan, by the way, might not be the only one who loses his clearance. The Washington Post reporting tonight that White House officials have drafted documents that cancel security clearances of several current and former officials. The Post reports that Trump wants to sign most, if not all of them, due to his anger over the Russia investigation. Joining me now for reaction are Buck Sexton, a former CIA analyst, Jim Hansen, president of the Security Studies Group, and Chris Hahn, who's a former aide to Democrat senator and the senior senator from New York, Chuck Schumer. Gentlemen, good evening. Good to see you here again.
Good to see you.
All right, so let's dive right in and begin with John Brennan. This is what he had to say earlier on MSNBC with Rachel Maddow.
I was very concerned and aware that the Russians were trying to leverage U.S. citizens in order to achieve their objectives in the presidential election.
While you were in office as CIA director before you left on Inauguration Day, did you conclude that U.S. persons were successfully leveraged in that effort?
No.
Now, I'll go to you first, Buck. If the question is asked, if the concern was there and the answer is no, then why is John Brennan going the way he does against the president?
That's a question that I don't think anybody can answer, including John Brennan, if you push him enough. People are talking a lot here, David, about how it's unprecedented to pull a clearance in this way by a president. But what's also unprecedented is for not just a former intel chief, but the most recent CIA director, not to just be critical of the president, but to be actively undermining the president, calling him a traitor, in fact, to the country. This man is the commander in chief, and Brennan's allegations have gone far beyond what you would see in normal political discourse, to the point where you could even say it's undermining institutions, to borrow from one of the common Democrat lines in terms of Trump on all things. And I see this now as a time when there are a few levels here, David. One is I don't think that people who don't have government business should maintain clearances. I think that should just be a general rule. And you certainly shouldn't maintain a clearance if you're going on TV and suggesting that you have secret information about the president that you can't really tell, but it's what's informing your judgment that he's actually guilty of treason. That's a big problem.
All right, so Chris, especially with what Buck just said, John Brennan going on TV, his clearance carrying the specter, giving his words more weight. I think that's fair to say for anyone in that position. But his answer was no, so I'll put the same question to you. If the answer is no, and given what Buck just said, then is John Brennan being honest or somewhat disingenuous in what he's doing on CNN or any of the other channels?
I watched a lot of that interview earlier, and he did not say that the president was out of line, and he did say, though, that he had new information that was widely publicized, including the Don Jr. meeting in Trump Tower that most of us didn't know about until this last summer. So there are more information that has come out, and I think this has led him to believe that there has been some sort of collusion, not necessarily with the president, and maybe a conspiracy that involved Americans that needs to be dealt with and needs to be uncovered by Mueller. As for the president stripping his clearance, look, I don't think any of us believe that a president should use the power of his office to retaliate against his political opponents. That is un-American. It is a banana republic-like move. This is not something we associate with the American president. This is like Nixon's enemies list, except for Sarah Sanders goes to the podium and reads the names on the enemies list. And if we had a Congress that was doing its job, it would investigate exactly why this president was doing this. And I think come January, we will have a Congress that will do its job under the Constitution and hold this president accountable through checks and balances.
Well, if they take the Congress, I think we can expect that from the Democrats. Jim, to you and this issue of security clearances. They're kept because, if needed, they will call back these advisors. This has been common throughout administrations. However, if the administration has made a decision that they are not going to call you back because of, as they see it, John Brennan is standing out against the administration, they may not trust his advice, and they have the right, then what is it really all about to remove his security clearance if they're not going to call him back? Why should he keep it if they're not going to call him back?
There's absolutely no reason for him to keep it because no one is going to trust his judgment now, having said what he did. You know, he basically claimed that the president has committed treason. So the idea that this is something that the president did, that is Donald Trump's fault, it's not. It's John Brennan's fault and the rest of the clown car of Obama national security officials who ginned up an investigation into Trump Russia based on a few minor players in Trump's orbit. Then they added in the DNC-funded Steele dossier to the mix. And the problem is there was no Trump Russia. So now what we're looking at is the Democrat deep state collusion blowing up in their faces like it was a Wile E. Coyote Acme smear generator. There's no there.
All right, gentlemen, let's bring this into the mix. This is John Brennan again on MSNBC talking about the special counsel, Robert Mueller.
It's called the duly appointed special counsel who was given the mandate to investigate what Russia did in terms of interference in our presidential election and who might have been working in support of Russian objectives and who might have committed a crime in that process. And so that's why Robert Mueller is a real national treasure. He needs to be able to continue with this investigation unimpeded.
So, Chris Hahn, does removing John Brennan's security clearance in any way impede Robert Mueller, his national treasure as Brennan sees him, impede his ability to carry out his investigation?
I don't think so. I think if the president acts towards going after Mueller anymore, I think he's going to lose some support, additional support in Congress from even people in his own party. But look, the bottom line is this. The president did not consult with his national security apparatus before he took the clearance away from Brennan. Those people might have said, Mr. President, we might want to work with him on things that he had worked on prior to leaving office. as a continuation of government, some institutional knowledge. He didn't do that. This was a decision made in the president's press shop to distract from the Omarosa story. And we're told today, earlier this evening, that the president has several others lined up to distract as needed if the news cycle gets away from him, as it did this week. That's despicable. He's playing games with our national security, and that's not right. And I would like to hear what Dan Coates has to say. I would like to hear what the current CIA director has to say. I would like to hear what they have to say about this, because I don't think that they are too keen on this. They were saying that they did not know, they were not consulted, and that's just wrong. There's procedures and policies when taking away. There's a process to take away these clearances, David, and the president didn't follow it.
Well, he is the executive, Buck, and he has the right, and consultation is not legally required. But you were in the shop, and the CIA director is not the only one who has the information. He's certainly the head of the agency, and maybe within that agency, the highest classification authority, but others have the information. So is the CIA director the only one that can be called back if they need information?
No, I think that's pretty overstated. Also, anybody who spent any time in the intelligence community will tell you that there are a lot of people working on any one issue, and there's a tremendous amount of institutional knowledge from people who aren't political appointees, who stay in these agencies for decades and decades of their career. So the notion that you're going to have this crisis situation where you can't bring back some director to find something out, I think it's just preposterous. That's honestly why you also hear it described in press reports as a courtesy, and that's why a lot of these individuals hold their clearance. But it's a different thing to have that courtesy when you're somebody who's then in private life versus somebody who is clearly trading on that recent access, not just for media appearances. And by the way, the whole thing about being silenced is just on its face ridiculous. He's clearly not being silenced. He's on TV practically every 5 minutes. You're seeing Brennan and all the other anti-Trump folks who are getting lots and lots of airtime and additional play here. And then also, David, I can understand there's some concern about political retaliation. I think that's a fair point to make for some people in some cases.
Thank you.
But one, I think Brennan is the exception so far. And two, this is not that big a deal. The people that are suggesting that this is the equivalent of, the Japanese being interned in camps or anything like that are going way overboard. But that's what we tend to see from Trump.
Where does it end?
Well, we certainly see the hyperbole. Let me bring Rush Limbaugh into this. Of course, Rush has been very upfront about this. And here he talks about essentially trying to overthrow a duly constituted elected president. Let's play it.
Where is it written that John Brennan, above all else, must be granted his security clearance when this guy is actively engaged in overthrowing a duly constituted elected president? Well, you know the answer to the question. It's because the left doesn't care about the Constitution. It doesn't care about the rule of law. It cares only about its power. And folks, none of those are cliches. None of those are exaggerations.
Well, Jamie Hansen, you heard it from the Rushster himself. So what do you say to that?
I think we saw this. It started during the election. It ran through the transition and continued once President Trump was inaugurated. They've been trying to stop him. They've been trying to discredit his administration, and now they're trying to get him removed. And there's nothing to remove him on. There is no collusion with Russia. There is, however, a collection of former Obama officials and DNC folks who did conspire to create a controversy and who were leaking information, a lot of it potentially classified, to the media. That includes Brennan, who's a prime suspect in that, along with Clapper and other people who signed these letters in support of Brennan saying he shouldn't have lost his security clearance. So they're the ones, I think the problem for him, it may flip to be looking at them as opposed to Trump, and they may get some unintended consequences.
All right, gentlemen, I know the debate's going to continue, but we've got it. We've got to cut it here. Quick last word, Chris. Go ahead.
The people who wrote this letter supporting Brennan include the man who led the mission to kill Osama bin Laden, which Brennan
He didn't lead the mission.
These
he
are American
JSOC.
patriots that
it's
care
completely
about
different.
our national security, not some conspiracy nonsense that you just spouted and that Rush is whining about.
All right, Chris, I gave you the last word. We've known each other a long time.
Thank
I
you,
was
David.
fair to you, my friend. Gentlemen, thank you. Buck, Jim, Chris, thank you very much. Stunning new revelations tonight about DOJ official Bruce Orr's involvement in the Steele dossier. And President Trump, he's ready to take action. Don't go away. Well, more anti-Trump by the DOJ? More anti-Trump activity exposed. DOJ official Bruce Orr reportedly caught in contact with Christopher Steele. That's the ex-British spy and the author that we now know of the infamous Russia dossier. By the way, financed by the Democrats throughout 2016 and 17. And in a major news story, FNC's Catherine Herridge reports that Orr wrote in an email saying Steele was, quote, very concerned about former FBI Director James Comey's firing, afraid they will be exposed. I wonder what he meant by that. The president went after Orr today.
I think Bruce Orr is a disgrace. I suspect I'll be taking it away very quickly. I think that Bruce Orr is a disgrace with his wife, Nellie. For him to be in the Justice Department and to be doing what he did, that is a disgrace. That is disqualifying for Mueller.
Well, joining me now for reaction, Wall Street Journal columnist Kim Strassel, retired FBI agent Jana Iannarelli, and former Democratic Pennsylvania Congressman Jason Altmaier. Good evening to you all. Kim, ladies first. I mean, you heard the president right there. What's your reaction?
Well, he's absolutely right to think that something highly improper went on here. You have a senior Justice Department official who is operating with the dossier author, with the opposition research firm that was funded by the Clinton campaign and the DNC. He is collecting this information from them even after Christopher Steele had been fired by the FBI for breaking the rules and talking to the press, and he is doing this without revealing.
Was not involved in it. I don't know what the problem is with him having a conversation. He understands the investigation is going on. He passes information on relevant to that investigation. I don't know what else he did other than the reporting issue that was inappropriate.
Okay, process and procedure. Right to you, John. I mean, here we have process, procedure, and you know, we don't know what was said and what he had between he and his wife. But there has to be some trouble and concerns about the dossier and after it was discredited and what went on after that.
There's absolutely a problem here with process and procedure. The FBI is part of the Department of Justice, and I'll tell you, you can't have an agent whose spouse works for an agency that is producing information from a source and then passing it back to the FBI. Why should DOJ be doing the exact same thing? You've got to have people who are unbiased and no connections here. This would be a problem in the FBI and, frankly, a fireable offense.
All right, so, Kim, the president tweeted this earlier today, and I want to read this. Very concerned about Comey's firing, afraid they will be exposed. I mean, those are pretty straightforward words. He goes on to, you know, basically reference the connection, the phony and discredited Trump dossier. We've heard that before. He finishes in that tweet, a creep thinking he would get caught in a dishonest act, rigged witch hunt. Is the president is he going too far? Is this a reach?
Well, I don't think it's too far to ask the question of what he meant when he said exposed, because, you know, the charitable explanation here is that he was worried that he would be exposed, his name would be out there. But guess what? Christopher Steele was already out there. He sat for an interview with Mother Jones months before and blew the lid on the FBI investigation, which was why he was fired by the FBI. So he can't be worried about his name being out there. So that would suggest that the exposure they fear is something different. Maybe the methods that this was all put together, maybe who was financing it, which we now know, maybe the unorthodox ways in which it was put across. Look, to go back to the process and procedure thing here, what on earth was the FBI doing interviewing Bruce Orr 12 times for the information he got from Christopher Steele? The FBI had already dismissed Steele as a source because he had broken the rules. So this goes just beyond just Bruce Orr. It goes to the institution's behavior, who knew about this at DOJ and who signed off on it at FBI.
So, John, the Inspector General's office and the reports and the ongoing investigation, Huber's investigation that initiated by the Attorney General, where should they be looking? Is it process and procedure alone? Are there individuals that frankly have responsibilities, the sign-offs on all of these conversations and call it interviews?
I think we have to look at who is signing off on these things, because first of all, it's perception. Even if nobody intended to do anything wrong, the American public have to have confidence in the FBI and the Department of Justice. That's why we have these procedures. Who is allowing this sort of communication and transactions to take place? Who authorized it? Who instructed people to go out and do it? That's what I want to know. We need to get that cleared up so Director Wray can take the FBI forward from what is all the problems created under Strzok and McCabe and others.
Speaking of Strzok, he tweeted, and this is what he had to say: Jesus, more BO leaks in the NYT, and BO likely to be a reference to Mr. Orr, obviously, and the New York Times. So right back to you, John. I mean, here we see yet more interchanges, more interactions, more concerns, texts and tweets.
Well, we all know Peter Strzok's very comfortable around a cell phone, whether it's tweeting or texting. For God's sakes, he needs to stop that. He's not helping himself. He's certainly not helping the men and women of the FBI who are trying to do their jobs. He should stay out of it at this point.
All right, Jason, the politics of this. As someone who has sat there in Congress, the politics of this plays into what's coming with the midterm elections. How do you see this playing out for the Democrats? Is there a way for them to use it?
I think that what I said earlier is true. There's little evidence that anything inappropriate happened regarding Orr, but the president has found with regard to Strzok and some others that if he uses his bully pulpit in a way that he's able to raise the stature of this issue, you can certainly paint it in a way that's unflattering, and who knows what will come out of it. So
But
I think
how are Democrats going to use this?
Well, I think the Democrats should be concerned that there is a point at which it does taint the Mueller investigation if more were to come out, and if the avenue that the president goes down does lead to some nefarious activity, then certainly that would undermine the credibility of the investigation. That has not happened yet, but what happened with Strzok and what happened with Orr, I mean, these are unfortunate circumstances that do lend to people who were inclined to disbelieve what Mueller comes up with, that lends credence to that concern.
Well, Kimberly, we are only hours away from the late night hours. Does Strzok, as he said in testimony, tweet in the middle of the night? And I'll kind of throw it to you. How do the Democrats plan to use this? How do you think they could use this?
Well, I think what Democrats should be concerned about is that the drum that they have beat for 2 years, pretty much ever since President Trump was elected, of Trump-Russia collusion, they have not yet been able to yield any public evidence that has happened. And that is what has enabled the president to talk about this as a witch hunt in terms of the way it got started and the unorthodox procedures that came about as part of it. I mean, Democrats will continue to suggest there's something nefarious, but they've gone a bit quiet on this, and it's becoming harder for them to use it as a campaign issue because most of what we're hearing is about problematic procedures and behavior by the prior administration in terms of this investigation.
Kim, gentlemen, thank you very much. Our special Trump versus the Intel resistance continues next. Is Bob Mueller's team headed for a major setback in its first trial? You know, a question on many minds tonight. Is Bob Mueller's team headed for a major setback? The special counsel's office first test in an American courtroom is the tax and bank fraud trial of former Trump campaign chair Paul Manafort. Fox News correspondent Kristen Fisher has been following the trial, and she's here with the latest. Kristen?
Hey, David. Well, just as jurors were settling in for their second day of deliberations, President Trump was weighing in on the trial of his former campaign manager. First, he was asked by reporters if he would consider pardoning Manafort. He said he wouldn't talk about it, but he did defend him. Listen to this.
I think the whole Manafort trial is very sad. When you look at what's going on there, I think it's a very sad day for our country. He worked for me for a very short period of time, but you know what? He happens to be a very good person. And I think it's very sad what they've done to Paul Manafort.
While the president was making those remarks, Manafort was sitting inside a small jail cell inside the courtroom with no TV, no reading material, but it didn't take long for word of the president's remarks to reach his defense team.
Any reaction to the president's comments this morning?
Great comments.
Mr. Manafort really appreciates the support of President Trump.
How are you feeling? Clearly deliberating longer, it favors your client?
I do. I'm with him. And he does.
So the jury has now deliberated for 14 hours over the course of 2 days, and during that time, they've asked the judge several questions. They've asked him to redefine reasonable doubt, the legal threshold for acquitting a defendant. The judge obliged that request, but he refused another one. The jury asked for an updated exhibit list connecting each piece of evidence to the corresponding charge in the indictment. Keep in mind, there are 18 charges and nearly 400 exhibits. It's easy to see how a jury could get very confused, but the judge refused that request. So the jury now has to sift through mountains of evidence without any index or key connecting particular documents to these individual charges. This afternoon, they knew they were not close to a verdict because they asked the judge to leave early at 5 p.m. so that one of the jurors could attend some kind of event in the early evening, and the judge actually let them leave early, but they'll be back first thing Monday morning, David.
Now, Kristen, the judge has spoken out, and I'm hearing that he said he's gotten some threats. What's that all about?
Yeah, he said this today in court, and he said that he's received threats to the point where he now needs U.S. Marshals protection. Now, he brought it up because he needed to explain why he didn't feel comfortable releasing the names of jurors before the end of the trial. And he had to do that because several news organizations had filed a motion to intervene requesting that the names of the jurors should be released. The judge heard them out, but in the end, he decided to keep their names sealed at least until after the end of the trial.
Kristen, thank you for joining me. Joining us for legal analysis, Kendall Coffey, former U.S. attorney, and Randy Zellin, a defense attorney and former prosecutor. Kendall, first to you on this. Paul Callan had this to say earlier on CNN about the president speaking out on Manafort. Let's play this.
The one thing I would worry about as a prosecutor, if there's somebody on that jury who's a diehard Trump fan, you have the President of the United States yesterday making comments about this deliberating jury. Even if Jeff Sessions said it rather than Donald Trump, if a lawyer said it, he'd be held in contempt of court.
Is contempt really an issue here, or is that a deflection, Kendall?
Not at all. And look, we're all talking heads talking about the trial, breaking it down, giving predictions and things like that. The system has to assume that the jurors are going to honor their oaths. But nevertheless, if you're Paul Manafort, this is kind of an intriguing development because, let's face it, there's got to be, statistically speaking, 3 or 4 jurors in that group that probably supported Trump. Got to think that somebody is getting word about it. Maybe, maybe not. But when jurors go home for the weekend, do they talk to family? Do they talk to friends? Maybe they're not supposed to, but maybe a lot of times they do. And we all know this, that a lot of people who support President Trump don't back down easily with their views of what the president says and what the president believes. So now you've got an indication that there's a clear endorsement of Paul Manafort, and by the way, a very harsh condemnation of this trial. So whatever Paul Manafort's been going through, this has got to be the last couple of days, 2 of the best days he's had in a long time.
All right, Randy, I mean, here we are, and, you know, the trial, the megaphone, obviously, of the president. We've talked about a lot of big cases before. You've handled a lot of big cases. When you look at this, how much does that play into it with the jury? And what about the judge's instructions and the jury being charged to judge the merits, not what they hear from the outside?
Well, working backwards, you would love to think that jurors will honor the oath of sympathy has no place in the courtroom. Your personal feelings have no place in the courtroom. Don't listen. Don't read anything. Don't watch anything. But there's a concept that we've all learned the right way and also the hard way, which is jury nullification, which is where a juror will say, I don't care what the law is. I don't care what the judge tells me. I'm going to vote with my conscience. I'm going to vote with my heart and be damned what the law is. But what is so bizarre here, I mean, this is how everything is politicized, chocolate versus peanut butter. But remember, the executive branch, who sits at the top of the executive branch? The president. Where does the Department of Justice fall? Under the executive branch. You've got the most important person in the executive branch basically saying that the Department of Justice under his watch doesn't know what it is that they're doing. None of this makes any sense. And Mr. Coffey, I must respectfully disagree with, because if you, as a lawyer, are discussing a case that you're involved in where that could prejudice the trier of the fact, a juror, that is a potential disciplinary violation. We've got the most important person in the country, perhaps in the world, speaking out while the jury is deliberating.
Well, you know, Kendall, as they say in the debate business, when your name's been mentioned, you get to defend your position. So what do you say to Randy?
Well, of course the president has a right to speak out about issues of public interest. He didn't plant this. A reporter asked him about the pardon issue, and he responded spontaneously. And if the suggestion is being that the president is somehow subjected to discipline, I've got to very strongly disagree with that. But I think what was going to be fascinating for the trial going forward is this is a very, very tough case for Paul Manafort to win. It would be one of the biggest upsets if he got acquitted on everything since, well, Donald Trump won the election against Hillary Clinton. But what would be a big victory for Manafort and for those who oppose the Mueller investigation would be a hung jury. And so the questions we got yesterday, maybe the impact of President Trump's statements, there could be some things adding up to suggest that there are at least a couple of jurors that have some skepticism about the prosecution's case and perhaps a reasonable doubt. Now, it's much too early for Paul Manafort to be getting optimism. We can recall cases such as Arthur Anderson, the accounting giant, such as Scooter Libby, the former chief of staff of Vice President Cheney, where the jury deliberated for 10 days and came back with a guilty verdict. Nevertheless, it isn't a pro-prosecution stampede, and given everything that Paul Manafort is facing in this trial, that might be a small glimmer of hope.
All right, so let's bring Senator Chris Murphy, the Connecticut senator, into this. This is what he had to say, and he tweeted this. So I generally choose not to hang on every twist of the Mueller investigation, but if Trump pardons Manafort, after maybe having promised a pardon to get him not to cooperate and gets away with it, then we're in a banana republic we just are. Now, he may not be the president, Randy, but he is a sitting senator.
Once again, what is happening with our system of justice, where once upon a time, transparency, you can go into the courtroom and watch what's going on, but we have everybody weighing in from a political standpoint. Suddenly we're a banana republic. The point remains that we have a system of justice that at its essence is based upon the public's, us as citizens, being confident that the right result is going to happen. And with the whatever the word is, politics.
The politics.
Everything is about politics. My God, what is happening in this country? As far as Mr. Manafort is concerned, he is presumed innocent until such time as the jurors go in and begin their deliberations. Their verdict should be based upon the evidence and nothing else. How the president feels, how Senator Murphy feels, how you feel, how I feel. It's simply based upon the evidence, and somehow that has so gotten away from us.
All right, gentlemen, thank you both. I mean, great legal analysis. Kendall, Randy, great to see you both. How the media is colluding with the intel resistance to take down President Trump. Details next on this Ingraham Angle special. All right, I've got a question for you. Is the media establishment colluding with intelligence resistance to try and take down President Trump? I want you to think about that for a minute. If you look at the past 24-hour media coverage of Trump, it doesn't seem that far off.
If you look at John Brennan's tweets, I mean, they are emotional. They are energized. This is someone who sees the sort of denigration of America's security and national security apparatus.
People who worked for Brennan were very clear that he was not a partisan. So you can say it on the outside because he feels a duty now to say something to save our country.
I've personally known and worked with John Brennan, and the same with Jim Clapper. Those people have more integrity and more intelligence and more honesty in their little fingers than this president could ever have.
All right, here with reaction, Candace Owens, Communications Director for Turning Point USA, along with Democrat and radio talk show host Garland Nixon. So now you're in trouble. We got talk show host Candace, but I'm still going to give you the upper hand on this. And ladies first, I'm a gentleman, just old school. So hashtag Free Press Day yesterday, and the newspapers across the country, some 300, and here we are today. What do you say, the media and the president?
Absolutely. They have been colluding with Robert Mueller and trying to get out this very false story that somehow Trump's campaign colluded with the Russians. And listen, it's evident in every single day. I bet if we looked back and counted how many times they said the word Russia, and then take a step back and realize that a single shred of evidence has been produced in the 18, 19 months that Donald Trump has been in office, tying him to the Russian campaign. This is absolute madness. And at a certain point, you have to wonder, when are we going to start to acknowledge that these people are conspiracy theorists? They are pushing and peddling a conspiracy theory every single day.
All right, so Garland, let me go to you on this. When you look at the media coverage of this, and we're a couple of talk shows, we get hours at a time to go over this, but the media gets a headline, sometimes a soundbite, the pundits come out. Just an analysis of the coverage. How do you see it?
Well, you know, it may surprise some people, but I'm a person that wants the Democratic Party to be healthy. And I, for some time, have been uncomfortable with the incestuous relationship between the intelligence community, the certain elements of the media, and the Democratic Party. I felt that the party should be focusing on a platform where, we're almost to the midterms, and the Democratic Party is so focused on this, they don't have a platform. So, to be honest, I would have to agree with you based on what I see. I think the intelligence community has kind of taken over, kind of like an octopus, and taken over a lot of parts of the mainstream media and the Democratic Party. And I don't think the Democratic Party is any better for it. I don't know if they're blind or if they're just going along with it, but it's not helping them.
So let's talk about the leaks, and I'll just ping pong between the two of you. We got you right here. The leaks coming from intelligence, Candace, how troubling is that as you see it?
Look, it's troubling beyond Democrat or Republican. That stuff doesn't even matter. The implications here are much more severe. What's going to happen afterwards? If we've lost faith in our intelligence community, where are we going to be at as a country when we can't trust them? This is why this issue, I try to tell people, this is not about what side you're on. This is about right and wrong, not right and left. And it's been very troubling for quite some time. And by the way, breath of fresh air. I'm so glad to hear somebody with some sanity say that there is no platform here. There's nothing else going on. And they seem obsessed with this, obsessed with getting Trump, and they're not realizing that you're losing a bunch of Americans in the process. We've grown apathetic with this. We've grown apathetic with hearing about the Russian collusion and nothing is going on. Paul Manafort is sitting in a cell by himself in solitary confinement over a tax charge. This is incomprehensibly corrupt.
All right, so Garland, look, we won't get into the legal analysis. We're two talk show hosts and one very brilliant young lady. But let's get into the narratives that are out there. You're talking to people in your audience. Are they echoing your concerns about the Democrats and running with this versus a winning message? Democrats used to have a message about helping the underserved, about jobs, about economy, but now that seems to have been taken away from them.
Yes, what doesn't get reported on is, we call what we would refer to is, like the Bernie people in points left, who actually are, believe it or not, are focused on policy. If you look at who's talking about policy, it's the left wing of the party, the liberal or right wing of the Democratic Party or centrist wing of the Democratic Party are so focused on the Russia issue, they're so focused on the investigation that if this falls through, which it's certainly starting to appear as though it will, and let's just say that, my background was in law enforcement. I was a commander of investigations division, and looking at this investigation, it's so tainted now, I don't see how you could ever charge anyone with this investigation and that it could survive the rigors of discovery. I think discovery would tear this investigation apart. And so I look at the Democratic Party and, right now it's not a party that looks very healthy going into the midterms. They could really put a hurting on the Republicans in the midterms, but I suspect that they'll, inch away with a few victories and call that a blue wave.
All right, so
what a breath of fresh air this guy is.
This is almost too rational. I don't know what we're going to do with this. All right, New York Times, and this is the New York Times executive editor on President Trump's remarks towards the press.
I'm deeply concerned, and not only concerned, by the way, about what happens inside the United States at some of the volatile Trump rallies. I think that the president has sent a message to despots abroad that you can disrespect the press. We've had presidents attack the press. We've never had a president go on foreign soil and attack the press.
All right, Candace, first to you. Quick response to this. Quick response to the New York Times editor.
Sure. So, look, the press is completely out of touch with the American people. They have been for quite some time. They've almost become a cult against just hating Trump and not listening to Americans. They're referring to Americans as racist, as sexist, as misogynist, putting them in all of these boxes because they don't understand how Americans are feeling. That's something that President Trump is tremendous at. That's the reason why he's sitting in the Oval Office today, is that he actually blocked out their nonsense and started to listen to the concerns of the American people. They're doing themselves no favor in this regard, and they're in many ways just going to help get him reelected in 2020.
All right, Garland, talk show host to talk show host. I got to throw the last word to you. Quick one.
Yeah, I think the bottom line is I think that you're not going to go wrong now attacking the press when it comes to, how it's going to affect you politically. The president went after the press prior to the 2016 election and won. So I think that people that are going to defend the press and think that's going to help them with the electorate are making a big mistake. The polls simply say that the press overall isn't very popular right now.
All right, Candace, Garland, thank you
He's
both.
He's my favorite person. He made my night.
You two are going to have your kumbaya moment. Good to have you both here. Really great to see you both. Intel chiefs claim their rabid anti-Trump behavior is patriotism, but they may only be playing into the hands of Americans' enemies instead, and we will explain right after this.